A historic candidacy, Kamala Harris enters the fray. The 2020 U.S. presidential election was a watershed moment in American history, marking a significant turning point in the nation's political landscape. It saw the first woman of color, Kamala Harris, nominated for vice president by a major political party, breaking new ground and setting a precedent for future generations. Harris's candidacy was historic, shattering barriers and inspiring millions across the country, particularly women and people of color who saw themselves represented in her. She brought a wealth of experience to the ticket, having served as a U.S. Senator and previously as the Attorney General of California, where she built a reputation for being tough but fair. Her nomination was a testament to the changing demographics of the nation and the growing influence of women and minorities in politics, reflecting a broader shift towards inclusivity. Harris's candidacy immediately faced intense scrutiny, as is typical for anyone vying for such a high office, with every aspect of her career and personal life under the microscope. However, the nature of the attacks, particularly those coming from then-President Donald Trump, took a uniquely personal and often inflammatory tone, aiming to undermine her credibility and character. This approach, as we will examine, would ultimately prove to be a miscalculation, revealing a deeper misunderstanding of both Harris's campaign strategy and the evolving American electorate, who were looking for substantive change. As the campaign progressed, it became clear that Harris intended to run on her record and her vision for the future, emphasizing her commitment to justice and equality. She spoke passionately about issues such as healthcare, income inequality, and criminal justice reform, highlighting her plans to address these critical areas. Her speeches were often characterized by a blend of sharp policy analysis and personal anecdotes designed to connect with voters on an emotional level, making her message resonate deeply. This approach, combined with her historic candidacy, made her a formidable force in the election, drawing significant attention and support from various demographics. The 2020 election was about much more than just policy differences. It was a battle for the soul of America, a contest between competing visions for the country's future. Harris represented a vision of a more inclusive and just society, one where every voice mattered and every individual had the opportunity to succeed. Her presence on the ticket energized Democratic voters and mobilized a new generation of activists and organizers who were eager to see change and make their voices heard. In many ways, her candidacy symbolized the hope and promise of a more perfect union, a future where diversity and unity could coexist harmoniously. Trump's playbook: personal attacks over policy debates. Donald Trump's political strategy, both during his time in office and throughout his campaigns, often relied on a confrontational and aggressive style. This approach was not just a tactic, but a hallmark of his political persona. This approach, while effective with a segment of the population, often alienated moderate voters and those who valued civility in political discourse. Many felt that this style of politics was damaging to the fabric of American democracy. When faced with the historic candidacy of Kamala Harris, instead of engaging with her policy positions or focusing on his own record, Trump resorted to a familiar tactic: personal attacks. This was a clear indication of his unwillingness to engage in meaningful policy debates. Trump's attacks on Harris took various forms, from questioning her eligibility to hold office based on her parents' immigration status. This was a tactic he had used before, casting doubt on the legitimacy of his opponents, to launching into misogynistic tirades about her demeanor and ambition. These attacks were not only personal, but also gendered, aiming to undermine her credibility and competence. He frequently employed derogatory nicknames and made baseless accusations, attempting to paint her as a radical leftist out of touch with mainstream America. This was a strategy designed to create fear and distrust among voters. This strategy, however, ignored the reality of Harris's political record, which was firmly rooted in the Democratic mainstream. Her policies and positions were well within the bounds of what many Americans considered reasonable and necessary. The decision to focus on personal attacks rather than substantive policy debates was a strategic miscalculation on Trump's part. It showed a lack of depth in his policy knowledge and an over-reliance on divisive rhetoric. It revealed an inability or unwillingness to engage with Harris on equal footing, choosing instead to resort to tactics that many voters found off-putting and beneath the dignity of the office he held. This approach did not resonate well with a significant portion of the electorate. This approach, far from diminishing Harris's standing in the eyes of voters, ultimately backfired, galvanizing support for her candidacy and solidifying her image as a target of unfair and unwarranted attacks. Her resilience in the face of these attacks won her admiration and support. While Trump's supporters may have cheered on his aggressive tactics, they did little to persuade undecided voters or appeal to those who were already skeptical of his presidency. The lack of substantive debate left many voters feeling disillusioned. The constant barrage of negativity and personal attacks, devoid of any real substance, only served to further polarize the electorate and solidify the perception that Trump was more interested in tearing down his opponents than building up the country. This deepened the divisions within the nation, making it harder to find common ground. The backlash: how Trump's strategy inadvertently boosted Harris. Trump's attacks on Kamala Harris, far from having their intended effect, created a backlash that ultimately benefited her campaign. His aggressive rhetoric and personal jabs were meant to undermine her credibility and appeal. Many voters, including moderates and independents who were crucial to winning the election, were turned off by Trump's tone and tactics. They found his approach distasteful and counterproductive, pushing them away rather than drawing them in. They saw his attacks as unfair, disrespectful, and unbecoming of a president. This sentiment was particularly strong among those who valued decency and respect in political discourse. This perception was further fueled by the stark contrast between Trump's behavior and Harris's own conduct throughout the campaign. While Trump was often seen as combative and divisive, Harris maintained a calm and focused demeanor. The constant negativity emanating from the Trump campaign, particularly directed at a woman of color making history, only served to highlight Harris's composure and grace under pressure. Her ability to rise above the fray was seen as a testament to her character. She refused to be drawn into a mudslinging contest, choosing instead to stay focused on the issues that mattered most to voters. Her emphasis on policy and solutions resonated with those who were tired of the political bickering. This approach resonated with many Americans who were tired of the divisive rhetoric and constant chaos that had come to define the Trump presidency. They were looking for a change, and Harris represented that change. The more Trump attacked, the more sympathetic Harris became in the eyes of many voters. His relentless focus on her only served to elevate her profile and endear her to those who felt she was being unfairly targeted. His attempts to paint her as a radical leftist rang hollow in the face of her record and her policy positions, which were well within the mainstream of the Democratic Party. Voters saw through the exaggerations and recognized her as a pragmatic leader. The attacks, rather than weakening Harris, only served to strengthen her support among key demographics, including women, minorities, and young people. These groups felt a personal connection to her story and her vision for the future. In essence, Trump became Harris's best campaigner. His actions inadvertently rallied more people to her cause, uniting them against his divisive tactics. His relentless attacks and outlandish accusations only served to highlight her strengths and make her case to voters who were looking for a leader who represented a more hopeful and inclusive vision for America. Harris's ability to maintain her poise and focus in the face of adversity won her admiration and support from a broad coalition of voters.